Well, the Canadian Human Rights Act may have had its censorship powers stripped out of it, but they're just one of many censors in Canada. There's a Human Rights Commission in every single province and territory in the country. And of course, universities are getting into the censorship game big time. It's so perverse. The places that used to be the crucible of free speech and debate are becoming the training grounds for tomorrow's fascists. Well, joining us now is a man who's doing something about that, our friend John Carpay for the Justice Center of Constitutional Freedoms. Great to see you again, John. You're one of our freedom fighters for 2013. By God, you've earned that title. Tell me about some of the fights you've had to push back the baby censors, the censors in training that inhabit so many Canadian students' unions.
In the past 12 months, the Justice Centre has represented students at 6 different universities in BC, Alberta, Manitoba, and Ontario. And we're forever dealing with student unions and sometimes university officials who think that it's their place to dictate what can and cannot be said on campus. Justice Centre is pro-free speech, but most of our clients are pro-lifers because that's the group right now that's getting the brunt of the censorship efforts. But we've also seen censorship of students against Israeli apartheid at the University of Manitoba. We've seen censorship of a men's rights group at University of Toronto. So it's across the board efforts on the part of student unions and universities to silence messages that they disagree with.
John, I agree with you that it's usually conservatives who are the subject of these speech bans, but it's important for free speechniks to stand up for even people we disagree with, because that's what precedent is all about. To put it in layman's terms, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So anyone who thinks, oh, I'll just censor my opponents, well, they're laying down the case law for their own censorship when the wheel spins around, right?
Well, in some cases, we've had student union rep that, on the one hand, was trying to censor a pro-life group on campus, and then on the other hand, complained very loudly when the students against Israeli apartheid were getting censored, saying that was a violation of free speech rights. But it's one and the same. You have to have respect for all viewpoints being aired, as long as they're being aired in a peaceful manner. The way to deal with bad opinions is you challenge them through debate and counter speech.
Well, exactly. And here's the thing. I mean, I myself find the Israeli apartheid slur offensive. I mean, we had a guest on the show last month, a real apartheid era, a black man in South Africa who lived under apartheid, who is now a member of parliament, and he showed how Israel is about the farthest thing from apartheid. I find it an odious slur, but you know what? The university is a place where young Jewish or Zionist activists should learn how to debate against that. And when the government comes in to censor your opponents, like a nanny breaking up a fight in a kindergarten, I mean, one day you're going to have to deal with ideas you don't like. And I think that we should train for that day in high school and college. If we insulate everyone from offensive ideas until they're in the real world, they'll have no training for how to deal with offensive ideas other than calling 911.
Well, this is the biggest problem, is a lot of people don't understand that in a free society where you do have free speech, nobody has a right not to feel offended or sometimes even feel hurt. And this is a big contradiction, because people will say, well, I support free speech as long as it doesn't offend anybody. But it doesn't work that way. If you have free speech, then you're going to hear and see things that you find offensive and abhorrent and even hurtful.
And for everyone, that definition is different, isn't it? I mean, everyone has
subjective.
A different taste, a different aesthetic sense, different, sensitive topics they don't like to talk about. Of course, the main answer is switch the channel or ignore someone. If that's not good enough for you, debate back, argue back, campaign back. We're actually drumming out of people the civic tools and instincts that they need by bringing this censorship. I want to show a video here while we talk, an example. People might think, oh, well, really, how bad can censorship be? Let's look, while we're talking, John, at a video from Carleton University of a pro-life activist who simply had peaceful protests. I mean, you can see her right there. Going from memory, I think her name was Ruth Lobo. But look at that. An armed cop with a gun in his holster, wearing a SWAT team style flak jacket. He's got to be 6 foot something, arresting this 4 foot nothing peaceful pro-life student. And this video goes on. They literally handcuff her and put her in a paddy wagon. Look, that's a cop. What? Oh, you better get more cops. I mean, this is what life on campus is like. If people are saying, oh, come on, so they weren't allowed to rent a campus, but they're arresting, they're handcuffing her, John. This is what you're facing on campus, isn't it?
And Carleton University is still fighting this in court, rather than just apologize and say, you know what, we were wrong. We should have given the pro-life students the same right that every other student group has to speak out in a public place.
What a brave cop, eh? Look at that brave cop with his SWAT tactical unit bringing this little gal into the back of a van. I mean, they weren't even sending out little ninny bureaucrats. They were calling in the... Did that cop really go to the police academy so he could train to take on a little lady like that who's about as terrifying as a baby lamb? Unbelievable. The thing is, of course, they come with the best of intentions. We don't want to hurt feelings. John, I want to switch gears. You fight a lot for free speech, but that's not the only arrow in your quiver. You also have been fighting for freedom of health care, which is a very personal right, the right to choose your own doctor, the right to get services outside the government monopoly. Tell me a bit about that.
Well, we represent Darcy Allen, who is a dentist, and we've got a court action in Alberta. He was on a waiting list for 2 to 3 years for back surgery that he needed. I say 2 to 3 years, it kind of depends on when you start counting the wait period, but even 2 years is way too long. Darcy Allen was confined to, he was forced out of being able to work to support himself and his family with his dentistry practice. He was in severe pain around the clock, and yet our healthcare monopoly said, well, too bad, you've got to wait another 8 months for surgery, when he'd already been waiting a very long time. So he paid $77,000 out of pocket for surgery in the United States. And he's now suing for a declaration. He's actually not even suing for reimbursement, very generous of him. He's suing for a declaration that he should be able to access health care outside of the government's monopoly. And it's the government's monopoly that is forcing people to suffer on waiting lists, and in some cases die on waiting lists. And this court action in Alberta, it's the first time that a court is hearing an application, has heard this past October, has heard an application to extend the Shawuli decision of the Supreme Court of Canada, where the court said access to a waiting list is not access to health care.
Oh, I want to ask you this. I mean, it's amazing that he spent 77 grand of his own dough because he couldn't get health care in Canada. He's not even asking for that. He's just saying, can the court please declare that in the future other people in my situation have the right to get other health? I mean, he really is a public interest litigant, and I'm so impressed that you're helping him. Now, we talked about this earlier in the year, but I want our Christmas time viewers to hear it again. The government of Alberta is opposing your lawsuit. Am I right?
Yes, and during the court action, when the government's officer was asked specifically how many people each year in Alberta die on waiting lists, she said, I don't know. And when asked, has Alberta Health made any effort to find out? She said, not to my knowledge. So here we have a government that doesn't know how many people are dying on waiting lists and doesn't care enough to even find out. And this is what we're up against in court. But we're expecting a decision sometime in 2014, and we've got a good shot at seeing this injustice being pushed back so that Canadians can have access to timely health care.
I tell you, John, you're doing so many important things. This healthcare thing may, in fact, be the one that changes the lives of Canadians the most, God willing, if you're successful. But the free speech one is close to my heart, because I remember what it's like being a student, and it's, the cops, I was never taken away in handcuffs by the cop. That's a new brutality that wasn't there when I was in campus. But all the ninnies, the nanny state censors in training that are so prevalent on campus. We only have a few moments left, but tell me one last thing. I know I'm coming back to the free speech subject after our healthcare card. Tell me about these free speech walls that you had, because I just love that idea. I mean, that you even need to have a free speech wall. The entire university should be a free speech wall. But tell me about these free speech walls you've been sponsoring across Canada.
Well, with local, we co-sponsor the walls with local groups like Students for Liberty, and so we've had walls up at Carleton University, Queen's University, University of Calgary, York University, and basically it's just wood surrounded by paper, and students can come by and write whatever they want. And the point is to draw attention to the importance of free speech, and only at Queen's did we have some problems in the last school year, although this more recently free speech wall was put up at Queen's again this year, and it didn't face the censorship that it did the first time around, so maybe we're seeing some improvement there.
Well, good for you. I'm so impressed. Before we go, tell us your website. It's the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom. What's the website that people can learn more? Because I think you're doing very important work here.
It's www.jccf.ca.
jccf.ca. That's great. John, you keep up the fight. You're one of our Freedom Fighters of the Year in 2013. Good strength to you in 2014.